Welcome everyone to our third Q&A of the ACTC Core Conversation Series. I'm Charlie Thomas, Professor of Philosophy at Mercer University and a member of the Board of Directors of ACTC, the Association for Core Texts and Courses. If you'd like to know more about ACTC, please check out the information on our webpage, coretexts.org. And also take a look at the other core conversations we've had. This is number 3 of the semester. We have one more coming up, and then we have a full program for the spring of 2021. Each core conversation is a recorded set of remarks by one of the ACTC board members in this case, and then, like this, a live Q&A where everyone is invited to come and ask questions about the text that our speaker's chosen. Today's speaker is Professor Paige Laws, who was a professor of English at Norfolk State University for 32 years. She was the founding dean of the Robert C. Nussbaum Honors College, and she is Dean Emerita of the Robert C. Nussbaum Honors College now. And she has chosen as her text the remarkable poem Margaret Walker's For My People. And it is my pleasure to hand over the conversation to Paige now.
All right. I'm happy to be here. Hello to all the kind people who are here virtually. I think I'm going to begin, because this is a relatively short poem that can be read fairly quickly. I think some people may not have had the chance to hear the earlier session, and I think it'd just be nice to read the poem to begin. This is For My People by Margaret Walker, which was written in 1936. For my people. For my people everywhere, singing their slave songs repeatedly, their dirges and their ditties and their blues and jubilees, praying their prayers nightly to an unknown God, bending their knees humbly to an unseen power. For my people, lending their strength to the years, to the gone years and the now years and the maybe years, washing, ironing, cooking, scrubbing, sewing, mending, hoeing, plowing, digging, planting, pruning, patching, dragging along, never gaining, never reaping, never knowing, and never understanding. For my pet playmates in the clay and dust and sand of Alabama backyards, playing baptizing and preaching and doctor and jail and soldier and school and mama and cooking and playhouse and concert and store and hair and Miss Chumby and company. For the cramped, bewildered years, we went to school to learn to know the reasons why and the answers to, and the people who, and the places where, and the days when. In memory of the bitter hours when we discovered we were Black and poor and small and different, and nobody cared and nobody wondered and nobody understood. For the boys and girls who grew in spite of these things to be man and woman, to laugh and dance and sing and play and drink their wine and religion and success, to marry their playmates and bear children, and then die of consumption and anemia and lynching. For my people thronging 47th Street in Chicago, and Lenox Avenue in New York, and Rampart Street in New Orleans, lost, disinherited, dispossessed, and happy people, filling the cabarets and taverns and other people's pockets, and needing bread and shoes and milk and land and money and something all our own. For my people walking blindly, spreading joy, losing time being lazy, sleeping when hungry, shouting when burdened, drinking when hopeless, tied and shackled and tangled among ourselves by the unseen creatures who tower over us omnisciently and laugh. For my people, blundering and groping and floundering in the dark of churches and schools and clubs and societies, associations and councils and committees and conventions, distressed and disturbed and deceived and devoured by money-hungry, glory-craving leeches, preyed on by facile force of state. Oops, lost my place. Preyed on by facile force of state and fad and novelty, by false prophet and holy believer. For my people, standing, staring, trying to fashion a better way from confusion, from hypocrisy and misunderstanding, trying to fashion a world that will hold all the people, all the faces, all the Adams and Eves and their countless generations. Let a new earth rise. Let another world be born. Let a bloody peace be written in the sky. Let a second generation full of courage issue forth. Let a people loving freedom come to growth. Let a beauty full of healing and a strength of final clenching be the pulsing in our spirits and our blood. Let the martial songs be written. Let the dirges disappear. Let a race of men now rise and take control. What a poem. And that was me pounding. I get so excited during the last stanza. I'm known to pound the desk. Many a desk have I pounded for the last stanza. So I would love to hear your impressions of the poem. As Charlie was saying in our first session devoted to the poem, it's a complicated thing. And the subject of race is always complicated. And I just say, let us proceed with the courage that Margaret Walker shows. That's one courageous lady, and a lady that will always have that voice. So somebody ask something.
The
and
queue's
let's see
open.
what we can do.
Yeah, please. Madison, go ahead. I can see you looking. Just unmute yourself. No. Kathleen, why don't, nope. Kathleen, you're also muted. Madison, you're still muted too.
Madison, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Now?
There we go.
Yes.
I was having technological trouble there, sorry. Oh, wow. So thank you for reading that. That was a really interesting poem, and I'm definitely in the same camp. This was a new poem to me, so I really enjoyed listening to it. Now, in some of the statements, and I can't remember which one specifically, but it seemed like there was a little bit of an anti-capitalist sentiment. I don't know if I was reading into that.
Oh, no, you were not.
Okay, because that's kind of what it seemed like. And I was just curious because, you know, as we're talking about this, excuse me, the continued conversation on, you know, how do we best ensure equality for American citizens, there seems to be kind of a divergence on this conversation where some are saying there needs to be government intervention for reparations to sort of restore sort of this historic injustice, whereas others, other prominent authors such as Thomas Sowell, Jason Riley, Coleman Hughes, are viewing capitalism as a means for Black folks to lift themselves out of poverty and to overcome hardships. So my question is, what would you think in response to that? And what do you think this author's perspective is on capitalism? And do you think it would be changed now?
Thank you, Madison. That's a good one. and right to the heart of things. Margaret Walker lived and worked during the time when communism was a very fashionable and widespread philosophy, political philosophy, particularly among Black intellectuals. And there's certain figures like Paul Robeson, of course, tangled with the U.S. government and was ostracized because of his interest in the Communist Party and his travels in Russia. Margaret Walker would have been exposed to Marxism, communism, the American Communist Party, during the 1930s, 1940s, along with Richard Wright and a number of other prominent figures at the time. And so she went through that period. And when, you feel that deeply about something, you never give it up entirely. Certainly as she grew older and, became an academic and taught, she was particularly active in Jackson State in Mississippi. And so, as we all do, we calm down a bit in our old age when it comes to politics, but it doesn't change with so much. And so I dare say there would have been a good chance, had she lived into the 21st century, that she would have been much more on the progressive side than anything else. So you've put your finger on a very important aspect of the poem, and I thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Kathleen's next, but I'd like to follow up on Madison's question very quickly, if I could, and just take you to stanza 8, where I think some of these, certainly the money-hungry, glory-craving leeches suggests a critique. But it's in the midst of this account of associations. So it's the dark of churches and schools and clubs and societies, all of these voluntary associations and community associations, which makes it a little bit different critique than just a sort of a critique of American laws or the American government. But it seems like it's a critique of these other sort of more smaller, more intimate, perhaps more voluntary associations. And I don't know if you have a sense of where that's coming from or what you make of that, but it's not exactly the critique. It's not exactly the money hungry, glory craving leeches that we are usually presented with. It seems to be a different set.
Mm-hmm. And that is a very challenging stanza within the poem. What to make of that. Because she mentions religion a number of times, or at least suggests religious thoughts a number of times in the poem, and almost every time it's with a negative connotation, it tends to darken the whole stanza, since there's it ends with false prophet and holy believer, that same stanza. In the original set of papers I did on this poem, I mentioned that, let me see if I can remember what I mentioned. De Tocqueville, that's what I was saying, that de Tocqueville, Alexis de Tocqueville, that French dude who was wandering the U.S., studying us, 100 years before, had said that this making of associations, this American penchant for clubs, associations, civil societies of various kinds within the larger body politic. He says that's typically American, right? When Margaret Walker is saying it, what happened in Black history is that people were not allowed to join these associations, right? Because of segregation, Jim Crow, and later segregation well into the 1950s and 60s. And so an entire parallel universe arose of Black organizations. And we've been hearing about Black sororities because of the vice president, who is AKA. And these associations, I think in Margaret Walker's mind, are a little bit tainted by the fact that they had to rise up sort of in imitation of the white associations, but sometimes were not as, I don't know, successful, or they were imitative. And so I think that's what bothers her about these Black associations. Now, I don't think that necessarily justifies turning up one's nose at any Black organization. And there are many important organizations, the Divine Nine, the Black sororities and fraternities being an excellent example of groups that have proven to be absolutely, seminal in the progress that the Black community has been able to make. So again, it's one of these disturbing but very honest stanzas within the poem where there's this dissonance, as you were saying in our first session. There are good things about these associations, but there are some bad things about them. There are wonderful things about the Black church, but there have also been figures that have been highly questionable. Norfolk was a center for Daddy Grace. I don't know how many folks have heard of him, but he was a very controversial prophet figure in the early 20th century. And he had some strange personal traits. He had very long nails, and he always appeared with a whole group of people. Some of the same quandaries have been associated with the Nation of Islam, in imitation, in some sense, of Muslim organizations elsewhere, but with a peculiar, again, everything is relative, but with a twist to the religion that some people find inauthentic. So these are some controversial things that you put your finger on, and goodness knows, for particularly if you're a white reader, to stand back and say, well, let us look down on these organizations. I think that would be quite unwise and unwarranted. But Margaret Walker herself is certainly calling Black history into question on many different counts. And that's why the poem is so powerful. It is affirmative in many, many ways, but it's also quite negative in others. So
that's fascinating and extraordinarily helpful. Thanks, Paige. Kathleen, please unmute yourself. You're next.
Hi, darling.
Hey.
I was interested. It ties into what you were just talking about on the sociological level, I guess, or the background level of its composition, because I find that same ambiguity in the prosody, in the text itself.
Okay.
It has those, thank you for the percussion, the cadences of call and response. It has the cadences of Black church. It has, and that of course is Christianity, which, the ambiguity of the white religion that was imposed on Black people in earlier generations, even than Margaret in the 30s. Um, I'm reminded of many things. I'm reminded of James Joyce reckoning with the same ambiguity. How is it that somebody who was of the race ridiculously oppressed by the English be a master of the English language? And how do you ever reckon with that? And I get some of that sense from this poem. I mean, this is her language. She uses it powerfully, very powerfully, but it's not her language. I'm not expressing myself very well. She kind of uses those rhetorical forms and tropes and poetic forms and tropes, possibly to increase the audience so that maybe it doesn't sound so foreign and alien and frightening to a potential white audience. What do you think about the composition?
You bring up a very, very good set of issues. And for whom is she writing? I mean, the title says she is writing for my people, okay? In some cases, and some of the greatest Black poets have used dialect to write for their people, right?
And she doesn't.
She does not. She uses very sophisticated techniques, hearkening back, I was saying in the initial papers, to epic devices, you know, Homeric, you know, catalogs,
Yes.
invocation of the muse, you know, all the things we learned and talk about at ACTC meetings when we hear about literature from the classical period. And I'm talking to a person who's, you know, that's what you do for a living. Kathleen does ancient Greek. But so she is able to use, dig out resonance from the most highly respected part of Western literature, the classics of Greek and Roman literature, and yet apply this material and these devices in a very, I think, accessible and yet sophisticated at the same time method. I mean, I think she's doing it all. I think she's really doing it all. But you are putting your finger on it well when you say, you know, this is not a poem for children in the sense of a little ditty. She uses the word ditty. It is more of a dirge than a ditty, certainly, but it takes the best of different parts of the Western tradition, and I think she does it in a very clever way, very clever. And what's so strange about it, as I mentioned again in the talk, you know, it's said to have been written very, very fast. That the poem, except for the last stanza, we know was written in like 15 minutes. I mean, it almost like automatic writing, almost something that would be part of a therapy session. Quite remarkable in that, because it is so sophisticated.
Yes.
As far as and when she uses lists are really, I think, the catalog device. I think that's in many ways, if you had to point to one thing she was doing, but she uses even the lists in such a interesting way.
Yeah.
And sometimes she uses parallel construction, but sometimes you see she on purpose defeats the parallel construction. If you're thinking like a child, you can do lots of things. You play school and you play mama, and you play store and hair and Miss Chumby. Parallelism is less relevant to a child. But then she will be listing elsewhere and be, smack on with, gerund, or whatever part of speech she's using. So yeah, the structure is quite modern. It's free verse. It's free verse.
Absolutely. But it's free verse that has recognizable origins in several different traditions.
Absolutely.
One of the things that disturbs me, saddens me, of course, and saddens everybody, is that she was thought of as a pretty good poet for a Black woman. I parallel to what you were just saying about the social organizations that were imitative. A friend of mine, a scholar, is writing a book about a Black Creole financial benefit organization in New Orleans. So I've been following her research with great interest about all of this, modeled on other, organizations that were well in place when de Tocqueville came to the U.S. I keep hearing separate but equal, knowing that they're never equal. And all that she had to reckon with in creating a poem that complicated. It's really quite remarkable.
It is. It is.
Madison, you're up again. Please unmute yourself.
Thanks. Sorry. So this poem for me was a little bit reminiscent of Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit. But it's much less violent in terms of like the descriptor words. And so I was curious, is there much of a deliberate use excuse me, what's the word I'm looking for? Obfuscation of violence in order to reach a wider audience? So in other words, towards the end, I think it's in the last stanza, she says, let a new earth rise, let another world be born, let a bloody peace be written in the sky. And so obviously that sounds kind of violent because, I mean, what is a bloody peace? So I was just curious, what do you think is use or lack of use of violence in this passage, and what purpose does it serve?
The last stanza is the trickiest as far as that subject of violence. Does she picture a revolution that really will be bloody, that will be Nat Turner in nature? Is it, or is the blood more figurative? A bloody piece in the sky, right? Nat Turner saw visions in the sky of angels fighting one another, that kind of thing. But the violence within the poem, even in other stanzas, you've pointed to the most heavily laden of the violent stanzas. But the mention of lynching comes before that. Right. So there's certainly, the violence is of quiet violence, of people being allowed to starve and not make enough to live upon. There's that kind of violence, systemic violence against a whole race of people. And then there's the violence that might be conceived of as the response. And that's more of what's going on in the very last stanza, I think. The idea of, well, it is not some kind of revolution necessary. Do Black lives not matter, right? we how timely is this point?
Mhm.
I mean, we may have integrated our associations, many of them, the Rotary and the other groups, and even country clubs may be integrated nowadays, but systemic racism hasn't changed. And when people are dying of disease like COVID-19, there's still violence being done. So it's the nature of the violence that we need to talk about here, and I think you all are coming up with good ways to do it.
Can I ask a follow-up, or do we have time? Is that okay?
Sure.
So do you see any contradiction possibly in sort of the calls for either communism or socialism against capitalism, which require greater government control from a government that is already perceived to be antithetical and inimical to Black bodies, Black people? And I think this is especially pertinent, as you said, like even especially with the Black Lives Matter movement, where their founders are professed trained Marxists. And so I've always found that kind of confusing. So I was wondering what your take is on that, if there is a contradiction there, and if so, what are its implications?
Well, I don't know. It may well be that some of the leaders of Black Lives Matter have studied Marxism in school and have enthusiasm for it. If my impression is that the leadership of Black Lives Matter is quite broad, lots of folks in lots of different places, and I think probably have many different ideas in addition to what you say. I don't know enough about political science to be able to address that very well. But I mean, that's the classic problem with more government versus less government. The idea of replacing government, you often assume that you're going to get fresh people with fresh ideas, and that it will things will get better with different people, and perhaps we certainly hope that can happen. But I don't have any good resolution to that. If I did, I think I'd run for office and convince people that I knew how to purge all the bad stuff from the past. I see my colleague Khadijah Miller, who's the current interim dean of the Honors College at Norfolk, and I just wanted to acknowledge her because she knows this poem, and I think she's had to listen to me talk about it before. And I'm delighted to see her. And did you have anything you wanted to say, Khadijah, to put you right on the spot?
Right on the spot.
Right on the spot.
I was just enjoying listening to the conversation, and I came in late, so I didn't want to make a comment that was already stated or anything, but okay. I will share that this is one of my favorites too, and I think the longevity of the applicability of the poem stands out to me quite a bit, which is good and bad, because you would hope that almost 100 years later, we would not be able to relate as well as we do to themes and challenges and the hopes that she presents in the poem. So, but this is one of my favorites, and I enjoy listening to the various perspectives. I think that's the power of literature, that, you know, there's 20 of us here and we could all read it and pull something different and helpful, challenging. And I think it's good to be uncomfortable. And I think in some places she might trigger that. And I think, you know, that uncomfortability often moves us to act in ways that we need to act to create change. So, no, I don't have anything.
No, you said you did have something to say, Khadijah, and said it well.
Thank you so much. I think Josh is next on the queue. If you want to unmute yourself, Josh.
Sure, Paige. Thank you so much for bringing this lovely poem to my attention. Indicates my lack of education, that I was not aware of it. So no big surprise there. But I'd like to actually get us to just look very narrowly at the second and third stanzas. And I wonder, since they have those lists, but they're different in the following respect, that there's a list that has no punctuation and no space. And then there's one that has ands. So can you tell me what you suspect is the difference in those two lists? What's going on? Why? You know, is it merely a question of rhythm that you would insert the ands in the third stanza? What do you think?
I think it's mostly rhythm, but there's also meaning to it. And I think we've all absorbed the meaning, but we may not have articulated it yet. I think in the second stanza, Josh, and you may agree with me, I hope you do, or you may see it differently. I think she's left out the commas because it's the nature of these activities: washing, ironing, cooking, scrubbing, sewing, mending, hoeing, plowing. They're endless, right? They run into one another by the fact they are so repetitive, and they are never ending. And the people doing them have been forced from the state of slavery, in many cases, into freedom, and are still doing the same things in the same repetitive way and not getting paid enough for them. First, they were getting paid nothing. Now they're getting paid precious little. And these things run together, from the indoor activities that women have been asked to do, Black domestic workers, washing, ironing, cooking, scrubbing, sewing, mending, to agricultural things, hoeing, plowing, digging, planting, pruning, patching, dragging along. People get tired of doing this stuff without reward. I think that's the key idea, that these things are happening and people are not getting to reap what they sow. Never gaining, right? Never getting ahead. Never reaping.
Right. So then I agree. That seems like the likely import of it. So what about the ands in the third stanza?
The ands are more reflective, perhaps. Again, this is quite subjective, but when we get the list of the things that children play, I think the and works because you almost picture little kids thinking a moment, and then let's do this one, and let's play this. No, I want to do soldier. No, let's do hair, right? There's more of a spontaneous from one to the other, not, the parts of speech are not parallel. And somehow the and works for the little kids where it didn't for their parents, so to speak, in the previous one.
So the and gives one there's a kind of way in which the and gives one breathing space. So it's
Exactly.
as if
Yeah.
one entered into freedom in some way in that.
The freedom of imagination, at least, because little kids, have, they're allowed to stop and think and move on to the next thing when they're ready, when they're playing.
Yeah.
So that whole stanza about the children playing, I think is delightful. And it's, again, I find it, even the fact that they're playing in the clay and the dust and the sand, I say in the paper that it, the white babies may be playing on beautifully manicured lawns, right, that are tended by a lawn service. But when you're little, that's one of the few times that it's less important. It's not that it's completely unimportant, but it's almost a respite from this difficult life. But it ends so soon. By the time they get to school, crash.
By the way, I shouldn't have said lovely to describe the poem. I should have said powerful.
Yeah.
Or something to that effect.
Well, it's
apologies for that.
No, I think I'll go with lovely because it's got its own beauty,
I wonder if
ugliness and beauty together.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Charlie.
I wonder if another thing with the and, I mean, in part because of what happens in the next stanza, in stanza 4, it's the children could be all of these things, within them, in their play, there's this kind of accretion of possibility. Doctor and preacher and soldier, and and so there's this kind of expansion of the imagination and the soul of the child that in the next stanza and following is crushed. So it's like the end of this sort of expansion of the soul, and the rest of the poem is it kind of being deflated.
But I think it's also it's echoed with the stanza 7. No, that's all pretty bad. We get that, the respite idea, the respite of a nice night at a cabaret when you're an adult, of the sense of, I wish I could find, lost, disinherited, dispossessed, and happy people. There's the adult version. And the same people are sometimes both, right? Oftentimes both, maybe at different moments. But there is that vacillation between light and dark within the poem that you all are pointing to in the different stanzas. And Josh, I like your question particularly because of the it's nitty gritty level. How is she doing this? You just showed us how she did it there. Something as simple as no commas and no conjunction in one place and conjunction in the next place.
The queue has grown a little bit while we've had this conversation about stanzas 2 and 3. So we have about 15 minutes left, plenty of time. So Brian Whitfield, please unmute yourself, Brian. Ask a question.
Thank you. I have simply a follow-up comment on these 2 stanzas. I'm sitting here thinking about Hannah Arendt's distinction between labor and work and politics. And that stanza 2 is so full of labor, all of these gerunds that are just run together, and all of these actions disappear. There's not an enduring quality to them. You dig today and plant, next year you have to do it all over again. By contrast, the hope of the children is to participate in activities of work and politics, to craft something that will last, to participate in the wider world. And so while that first generation is submerged in labor, the hope of the children is to engage in those other human activities and in that sense transcend the labor that we see in stanza 2.
It's nice. That's very nice. I'm looking at the list of the things they're playing. And certainly the church is a profession. I mean, church, doctor, the military, school, jail is in there though.
But also the playhouse, the concert.
Yeah, concert, store, hair. Miss Chumby. Who is Miss Chumby? Would somebody tell us? I have no idea. But I assume it's just somebody who's in the neighborhood who has, you know, a hair salon or a nail salon and they like her name. Maybe she's from the islands. Maybe she's not, but she's got a great name. Does anybody know any more on that? I should have asked Alice. Well, I mean,
my guess is, Paige, if you don't know an answer about this poem in this crowd, that
yeah,
we don't know it either.
I should have asked her. That was my
I'd like to
one time to ask
her. So thank you for that, Brian. Let's see, Mr. LaCure, you're next. Please unmute yourself.
I just did. Thank you, Paige, for bringing this to us all. My question is not so detailed as some of the ones so far, but I would pose it in the following way. The poem seems to me to have every reason for anger in it, and yet the deepest mood of the poem does not seem to be anger. And I wonder if that seems so to you, and if it does, how you would characterize what I would call the deepest mood of the poem.
Well, I think I agree with you. I think the poem is life affirming, and that's where its heart is. I think that's. I can't come up with anything more cogent at the moment than life affirming. But the rage is there. The anger is there. It's justified. It's justified anger. And the anger is still justified on whatever day we're on, November 13th, 2020. But you would burn yourself up. You would literally burn yourself up if you lived with rage 24/7, I think. And this is something that I have not had to experience in my life. I mean, I've had things that have made me angry, but I've never been subjected to things that would justify the anger that the poet is discussing here. Because she's talking about the anger of individuals, but she's talking about my people, right? It's for my people. The collective anger, I think, is what we're talking about. So each person within the collective has got to figure out how to negotiate living every day. You know, you cannot spend your entire day being angry without, you know, dying of some stress-related disease, which of course African Americans get more than whites. But I think you've made a very useful observation, And that's why there's a universal quality to it. And we, white readers look at it and we should be embarrassed and chagrined because our ancestors did these things and we continue to be part of a system built on it. But the poem is for us too, obviously. And I think, I think it's for people anywhere around the world because it is, how do you live every day? Maybe you're a Palestinian and you have very good reason to be angry. Maybe, you're in Rwanda and one of the ethnic groups that's been hurt and killed. So yeah, but I think the fact that I think the balance is tipped towards the life affirming nature of it. Because goodness, you've got one life. What you gonna do with it? I think that's what she's asking you, whether you're white or black or whatever. What are you going to do with this life? But she certainly shows that this group of people, for my people, her people, have been through a lot and have come out the other end and continue to come out the other end, so to speak.
Thanks. Kathleen, you're next. Please unmute yourself.
I'm seeing new things the more I listen to this. So thank you for all of this. I wanted to say one tiny little thing in response to what Khadija said. Yes, I absolutely agree that it's a shame that the grievances that Walker articulates so forcefully in this poem have not yet all been alleviated. But in a certain sense, the fact that this poem has not reached its use by date, it's a testament to the universal quality and power of this particular poem and poetry. So that's what I think. That every word, this is what we've been talking about, every comma is there for a reason. Every and is there for a reason, and it all contributes to the power of this poem that continues, and one must presume will continue. The revelation to me, Paige, I was thinking of Christianity, organized Christian religion, let's say, on this poem, but the way you talked about the lists, I first thought of Whitman, but then you also think of Homer. And you think, and violence. This is the heart of the epic poem. The epic poem is about violence. Violence is not in and of itself good or ill. It is, and is necessary. For Homer, anyway, in the Iliad, Troy must fall. It is doomed to fall. For Virgil, even more so. He understands that for Rome to rise, Troy must fall. Mm-hmm. And that's, and that requires violence, terrible violence, in which the gods are complicit and take sides. What we could say a couple of centuries later is that Rome must fall too, for something else to rise. That this violence that is both destructive and generative at the same time is a universal experience of all people. That to me lends this epic and universal character to this particular poem, which I see more and more after our talk today in that epic tradition. I hope that Americans and everybody are still reading this poem 100 years from now, 200 years from now, which is not to say I hope that these issues that she raises haven't been resolved by then, but that she articulates something profoundly human. And that's what the humanities do. They teach us those hard lessons about what it means to be human. That's the highest compliment I can pay this poem. In my mind, totally worthy of it.
And it's a good way to bring it to the level of the humanities and the arts,
right? Because
it's the way an individual, I mean, you cannot separate this poem in any way from the Black experience. You cannot take it away from the Black poet and the Black issues being discussed. To try to do that would be wrong and misguided.
Mm-hmm. But
at the same time, you can read Homer and not be Greek. And it's tricky. It takes profound respect for the tradition that a particular work of art comes from, in order to begin to universalize it. You have to keep both things going.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I agree completely.
And that's not always easy.
That's right.
Again, particularly
it's the sign of a really good poet.
It's the sign of a great poet and a great reader too, like you, and like many of the people on the screen here. You have to respect the tradition from which this poem comes, and note one's complicity in the wrongs that it's discussing, in order to talk about its universality. Can't have one without the other.
With apologies to Madison, who's still on the queue, I'm glad you got your voice in the conversation, but I'm afraid we're out of time, so I'm not going to be able to recognize you once more. But would you all please join me in whatever way you like to thank Professor Laws for this wonderful Q&A.
Thank you all. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for joining us for this core conversation number 3. We have one more core conversation for this fall semester 2020. Emma Cohen-DeLaura will be talking about her comments, her reading of a section of Plato's Laws about a month from now. So check back on the ACTC webpage where Professor Cohen-DeLaura's remarks are already recorded and where we'll have a Q&A with her in December. Thanks again, Paige. This was excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.